Oh my God, look at that.
Wow. Wow.
What? This is the biggest one we've ever had, right?
Now I'm really nervous, guys.
Oh no, this is going to be great. What I mean, it's continues to be such a warm, wonderful, welcoming group of people.
Yeah,
But
I love this group.
thank you. Congratulations to everyone who got to be in the biggest group so far ever. This is so exciting. Well, I know that I have waited for this particular topic for, well, let's just say decades, because I so relate to this. At least the rabbit hole I think you're going to go down. Like the experience of, and the more I care about somebody, the more predictable the pattern is that I'll be just free thinking. And then I see it come over their face like either they don't understand or they don't understand and it makes them suspicious. And then I start explaining, like, no, 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 no. I'm just thinking out loud. And then I go into, well, but I can see it from a lot of different directions. And then they're like, you're disingenuous too, on top of your other feelings. I mean, it's just a nightmare. So I can't wait to get into it. Some quick guidelines before we start. If you can save your questions and comments out loud till the end because we have so many people. I think that would be best. Um, I know that Christopher is going to ask several questions. If you could just sort of put a pin in things you want to talk about. Also, you can write in the comments section in the chat. You can write read, which means you want something that you are thinking or a question you have read out loud, which we'll probably do toward closer to the end. And I'll come back on after Christopher's done with the main body and remind people to raise their hands and all that jazz. So take it away.
Well, thank you, Don, and hello, everyone. I'm coming to you today from the very rainy Pacific Northwest. I'm in Oregon. I really appreciate everyone saying where they're from. That's really lovely. I love that sort of thing. And thank you, Don, for that warm welcome and introduction. And I just want to say also, like, um, you can ask any question you want. And the way this is structured, I'm gonna present my little spiel, what I have to present. It's maybe 25 minutes at most. And then I tried to do it so that we had at least half of the session to actually talk with one another. So please don't feel unnecessarily shy because this is really about us connecting to me. Um, so I guess I'll just get started then. And I apologize for reading. My ability to memorize has declined in recent years. I can't quite remember all of this without help anymore. Um, so bear with me, please, if I don't look at you. Um, so I just want to thank you again for being here today. I'm really delighted. I'm super nervous also. I'm just going to own that right now. So thanks for all the I won't bite messages and things like that that came in. That was quite lovely. Um, all right. So, Dawn, I'm not sure why you asked me to talk about this particular topic, like the panic of being misunderstood. It's a heavy topic, but my research, which I'll tell you a little bit about later, is also pretty heavy at times, and I know something of what this kind of panic feels like. There's definitely something specific about this particular kind of panic that I want us to sit with today. It's not just an awareness of like individual differences in perspective or of the fact of cognitive dissonance, but it's like a visceral embodied knowledge that you won't be heard or read accurately, that your attempts at clarification will probably be interpreted as defensiveness or rigidity, and that the very act of trying to be understood might be used as evidence of your unreliability, your incompetence, or your difficulty. So for me and for a lot of other people autistic people I've gotten to know over the last several years, this fear of being misunderstood isn't an occasional anxiety. It's a constant embodied panic of memories of words being twisted, intentions erased and misread, attempts at clarifications dismissed. I and we carry these in our bodies all the time. Many of us actually anticipate and brace for being misunderstood before we even speak. But I don't want to sit here and just talk at you this whole time. I want us to spend our time trying to relate, trying to understand one another, as far as we can and through this sort of presentation. It's a hybrid presentation. It's not really academic in that sense. It's a little bit, but it's more conversational, and that's by design. So for me, this presentation is a lot of things. It's a contribution to our collective testimony and advocacy efforts. It's an opportunity to communicate as the autistic person that I am. It's an opportunity to share with you all a little bit about my work, but most of all, it's a chance to connect and to learn from and with all of you. So as Don said, I have a few questions of my own. I have a lot of questions actually that writing this presentation actually prompted for me. But one of the ones that I want to ask you to consider as we go through this is what the idea of the panic of being misunderstood actually means to you. Like what did you think this session would be about based on the title and the description? I think the way we read things that's really sort of my interest is how do we communicate? How do we interpret? How do we make meaning? How do we understand meaning? And how do we understand one another? So I'd like you to consider that question as we talk, and I'd like to circle back to that at the end if we can. Okay, I'm going to share my slides, Roger. We didn't do that to start, and I hope that this works just fine. Okay. So let's see. Any recommendations as content only or side by side? What works better, do you think? Let's try that. Okay. Where did it go? Can everyone see? Okay. Excellent. All right. So one of the first pieces that I ever read that really spoke to me was written by Gloria Anzaldúa, the self-described Chicana dyke feminist, Tejana potlatch poet, writer, and cultural theorist. She challenged academic norms by crossing boundaries, by breaching and combining circles of being, knowing, and ways of presenting, and embracing the plural nature of our identities and humanity. In Now Let Us Shift, Conocimiento, Inner Works Public Act, she offered a recipe for how we might make something of our experiences, our liminality, our fraught existence between the worlds we have to inhabit. She says that by redeeming our most painful experiences, we can transform them into something valuable to share with others so they too may be empowered. To do this, she says, we can stop and ask the spirits to help us string together a bridge of words, to give back a gift wrested from the events in our lives, a bridge home to the self. This presentation is my attempt to create just such a bridge. So why circles? The circle to me is significant in many ways. There's the circle as a sacred geometric object, for example. It's reflected in this mural from the Andean community of Saraguro, Ecuador, where I did my earliest field work on ethnomedical systems nearly 20 years ago. The text reads, Solo unidos haremos realidad el sueño de todos. Only together can we realize the dreams of all. So that's one kind of circle. This disc here you see on the left is a disc made of flowers that the members of the community grow and produce and make every year in a quasi-competition for the church. The other side is mandala representing various spiritual and cosmological dimensions of the Quechua ontology. But those are just certain kinds of circles. There are also social circles, circles of friends. There are circles or cycles rather in how ideas and phenomena come and go. Circles of scholarship, art, literature. There are circles or cycles of experience as well. And there are story circles like this one. Memories of traumatic events especially come in cycles for me, always recirculating, often in the shower for some reason. And I process these through stories and music, and today through sharing a story about music. But before I go any further, I want to acknowledge where I'm speaking from. This part is really important to me. I'm a white cis male anthropologist from the Deep South doing research with other late diagnosed adults, what Lai and Baron Cohen called the lost generations of autistics. And my work is in the United States. I'm relatively new to autism and autism research, having only self-identified in the last 10 years. I was formally diagnosed as ADHD in May of this year at age 52 while in the midst of this very research project, which is an odd experience, let me say. So the stories I've collected and analyzed, they come from specific contexts, from specific systems, specific sort of kinds of oppression, and from specific cultural assumptions. But how I think and talk about them, how I can think and talk about them, is filtered through my own lived experience and through my socialization and training as an applied medical anthropologist. These stories don't represent all autistic experiences or perspectives, and they can't, but they help us see the patterns more clearly. And they make visible what I call an architecture of impossibility. What I'm offering today is one perspective on this set of patterns that I've been observing in the ways autism is lived, conceptualized, discussed, and politicized. You know better than me whether any of this resonates with your experience or not. I'd love to hear from you during the discussion. So why music? And I don't know where that blue line came from, guys. Well, I struggle with alexithymia, difficulty identifying and describing emotions, as many of us do. Music is how I communicate what I find difficult or impossible to convey in my own words. Music also provides a kind of structure for processing the beauty and absurdity of life, the kinds of intense feelings that can surface when listening to stories of profound suffering, and a safe place for reflecting on my own experiences as a late diagnosed ADHDer. The shapes and rhythm of music, they give me that structure. They give me a sense of movement, transition, growth, sometimes even resolution that I struggle to find elsewhere. My song choices say a lot about me too, about how I view the world and feel about my life and my relations with others. So there's that dimension of communication too. We have a question. Can we take it? Or was that an accident?
Before we go back to the previous, hi, this, I'm just wondering, on the first slide, right? It looked like that was like from a place. Do you know like where it is from?
The mural?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Here.
from
A little town called Saraguro in central Andean Ecuador. It's where I did my ethnobiology.
Makes
Oh,
it
wow.
work. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, I'm gonna carry on so we can move. Okay. Is there a specific question about that mural that you'd like to ask?
No, I was just wondering where it was from.
Okay. Okay. So this presentation is an exercise in, for me, in an exploration of how we talk about talking about ourselves, what we call the meta-pragmatics of autistic communication. So, and I'm interested particularly in how we do that through stories. So today I'm sharing lyrics from a song called Feathers from one of my all-time favorite bands, A Perfect Circle. The album, titled Eat the Elephant, was released in 2018, and that's an interesting fact in itself from a socio-political commentary standpoint. The album, to me, is a brilliant reflection on modern life. It's worth a listen, or 50 for those of us that are so inclined. But instead of using the official album cover, I chose this fan art created by a young musician who goes by Historical Judge 454 on Reddit. There's a reason for that. This connects to the sort of nature of the kinds of stories that I frequently hear in my research. So his friend and former bandmate shared the Eat the Elephant album with him after the death of his mother, and it became his favorite. Tragically took his own life at the age of 16. So Historical Judge 454 made this tribute cover for their band in honor of his friend. And I felt the homage was fitting given our subject matter today. It's heavy and disturbing, but it's also beautiful in its own way. The band, the name, The Circle, is one of the many circles that thread through my work, it turns out. That's for another day. For me, this song speaks to, let me drag this out of the way so I can see. The song speaks to the transformative potential of sharing stories, stories of grief, sadness, fury, deep disappointment at humanity's failure to see autistic people as we are, and our species' stubborn refusal to embrace the full breadth of human diversity. Like Anzaldúa, the artists, the writers here, they remind us that sharing our stories allows us to transmute these burdens, expectations, and traumas we carry into something lighter, perhaps a little easier to carry, and most importantly to me, into connection, what otherwise might be oceans of difference. But out of respect for sensory and aesthetic preferences, I'm just going to read these rather than playing them. Or you can read them, but I'd like to read them. Damages define our border, wall and manor forged in flame. Knowing little of your wounding, share our mending all the same. Weight of words and wars we carried, unlike you, just like you. Eyes of secrets, storm and story, show and tell, we'll make it through. Sadness like a pendulum pulls us round and to and fro. Onus, fate, and undue odium, armor, anchor, lead and stone. By the telling, may they become, may they all be feathers. These words in particular capture something about what I've learned through my research. Onus, fate, and undue odium, burden, determinism, and hatred. These are discourses that many autistic people live with every day. Autism constructed as a burden on families and society, autistic futures presented as predetermined and limited, the stigma, the derision, the casual cruelty, the systematic discounting that so many of us carry in our bodies all the time. But the song offers something else. By the telling, may they become feathers. Not that the weight disappears, but through sharing, through what the song calls show and tell, these heavy things might change quality. Armor and anchor and lead and stone transformed through the act of telling into something we can carry a little differently. Knowing little of your wounding, share our mending all the same, to me speaks to the awareness of intersectionality and the importance of that in our relations. It's what I consider the heart of coalition building across difference, actually. We don't need identical experiences of marginalization to recognize each other's struggles and build solidarity. This is foundational to the Black feminist thought, decolonial theory, and disability justice framework that I was socialized within. It's about lateral connection and mutual recognition across differences, not hierarchies of suffering or competitions over who has it worse. That some do have it worse is absolutely true. And if my research, the ocean of autistic testimony, and the current federally sanctioned attacks on and erasure of diversity of all kinds is any indication, the work of building coalitions and collective capacity is beyond urgent. That's one of the subtexts of this presentation for me. The work is urgent, and it takes all of us. No, come on, slide. Oh, go back. All right. So I want to tell you a little bit about how my research came to be, because I think that matters. And I've certainly seen the overlaps in the stories that I've heard. So my research came about through my own lived experience. So my research is on invalidation experiences among late diagnosed autistic adults in the US. And hopefully it's a contribution to our efforts to be seen, acknowledged, and accepted as full citizens and human beings capable of articulating and theorizing our own lived experience and expertise. I need to tell you about how this research came about because it matters. It shaped everything that followed. For 8 years, I lived with an undiagnosed debilitating illness. I had pain that made no sense to doctors, fatigue that couldn't be explained, a body that had stopped cooperating in ways I couldn't articulate clearly enough to be believed. I had to leave my career of over a dozen years as a senior manager of gardens at a botanical garden. It was work that I loved, work that shaped my identity, work that connected me to land and living systems in ways that really sustained me, and that loss was profound. During those 8 years, I went back to school to finish my master's degree in applied anthropology. I'd started it almost 11 years before, but due to some things that I couldn't tolerate in the leadership of my program, I left for a long time. But I went back after many years and after this collapse in my physical condition. And at the same time, I was also seeking an autism assessment. I was learning about invalidation from other autistic people in online communities. I was trying to make sense of why every clinical encounter felt like a battle for basic credibility, all of this at once. I managed to finish my master's degree despite COVID complications. And then I applied to Oregon State's Applied Anthropology program early in 2021. I did this because my body wouldn't do the work that I had done for most of my life. I couldn't tolerate that sort of physical work anymore. I didn't know why yet. But I was accepted to OSU's program. And then all of a sudden I was navigating a program where my first PhD supervisor responded to my worsening condition with discrimination that eventually forced me to change not only supervisors and committees, but my entire research focus. In late 2022 or early 2023, I finally received a fibromyalgia diagnosis. And then during what was to that point the most intense flare-up I'd ever experienced, I spent 3 days on my floor, unable to do much but endure. In that space, pain-induced, body-bound, and stripped of all the usual ways of being, the vision for this research came. It wasn't a mere intellectual curiosity at all, but it was an urgent necessity. I needed to understand what was happening to me. I needed language for it. I needed to know if others experienced these kinds of patterns and things. I needed to make sense of how invalidation operates, how it compounds, and how it becomes embodied. So my research, inspired by community knowledge and care shared online, emerged from my body in crisis, from the convergence of autism assessment and fibromyalgia diagnosis, from academic precarity and professional loss. I came to this work because fibromyalgia brought me to it. And I can't separate the two, and nor would I want to. That's what Kara's method means to me. The work is inseparable from the life that generates it, and I can never forget what's at stake. Around that time, I also discovered research from the Netherlands on invalidation experiences reported by patients with invisible chronic illnesses like rheumatoid arthritis and fibromyalgia. Interestingly enough, they identified two main types of invalidation, what they call discounting, when people actively dismiss what you're saying, and lack of understanding, when there's a genuine gap in knowledge. And they found that it happens across 5 domains: work, school, healthcare, relationships, and family. And that division between relationships and family needs a little articulation, but we don't need to worry about today. But the patterns they were documenting were the patterns of my own life: being doubted, having to prove everything, the accumulation of dismissals across every domain, healthcare invalidation during my diagnostic journey, work invalidation that cost me my career, academic invalidation from my supervisor, social and family invalidation as relationships strained under the weight of invisible illnesses. This is what the theories of social suffering are pointing to, that suffering isn't just an individual phenomenon at all. That distinction between discounting and lack of understanding turned out to be critical. Sometimes people genuinely don't understand. And when I was talking about this presentation with my committee during our last debrief, my committee member in psychology asked, well, but misunderstanding isn't always innocent, and it's not. And that's the difference between this lack of understanding and the discounting. That's why that difference matters, because sometimes this is deliberate. Sometimes people, they understand well enough, but they choose not to believe or credit what they're being told. So I started seeing how these patterns were operating at multiple levels in our individual bodies, in our social relationships, in institutional structures. Invalidation is not at all confined to medical encounters or to any single domain. It pervades every sphere of social life. Oh, why would you not go forward for me? There we go. Okay. So an interesting thing that I discovered in this process over the course of my journey and through my research, is to me, it's become painfully apparent that the stories that we don't, won't, or can't tell in everyday actions are often the most significant and most powerful. This is what I call the dark matter of our lives, the matrix that holds the fragments of our experiences and identities together. Like dark matter, this matrix is invisible to most, and to some it doesn't exist at all, but it shapes literally everything, whether it's acknowledged or not. Enforced or elective absences and silences around experience of invalidation, violence, suffering, trauma, but also pleasure and joy. They show us the shape of social norms and structures. They act as resonant or discordant frequencies, revealing what's considered acceptable to discuss or to express in social interactions. And the normals, they have a phrase for these boundaries. They call it TMI, too much information. This seemingly innocuous phrase makes visible, to me, what's usually invisible. It makes clear that not all human stories can be voiced, or at least not by certain kinds of people, and only in certain prescribed settings. But through raw, intimate, intensely vulnerable conversations with other late diagnosed autistic adults, conversations about self-harm, suicide and suicidal ideation, about compounded and compounding trauma, about grief, righteous anger, and about emerging self-acceptance and self-love, I've learned that TMI doesn't have the same significance for autistic people as it does for neurotypicals. I've come to see the sharing of these deeply personal stories not as too much information, but as what I call TNI, the necessary information. An ADHD therapist friend of mine calls this mutual sharing of sometimes unflattering stories the autistic handshake. I had to laugh when he said that because I found it surprisingly accurate. But these are the stories that we can't or won't share with those around us for various personal, professional, or legal reasons. But by sharing these stories, we learn that we aren't alone. We feel seen and heard. And although the term understanding is apparently under scrutiny by some academics as an inappropriate goal or an impossible ideal, that's a weird topic. I'd like us to pick that up later. I think we do feel something like understanding from the person in front of us, if only for the span of the interaction. This understanding, such as it is, provides autistic people with a form of sustenance too often denied us by the worlds and spaces we inhabit. Like invalidation, another term rendered impotent by its ubiquity in popular discourse as a stand-in for hurt feelings, the significance of understanding as both concept and tangible experience varies depending on the parties involved, and importantly, on the power differentials between them. But as Amsel Dua and Keenan and Howardell of A Perfect Circle remind us, through the sharing of these often tragic and horrific tales, we can find hope. We find resolve to carry on when the world seems to refuse or refute our every move or word. And perhaps most importantly, at least for me, we find a form of community, and not community as some idealized unity or utopian dream, but community as shared recognition across differences. What I've been documenting through my research are what I'm calling autistic counter practices of trust. These are the ways autistic people build relational safety with each other in explicit opposition to and refusal of neurotypical norms. The sharing of TNI, what would be called oversharing in most neurotypical contexts, is one of these practices. Making our interpretive processes visible is another. Requesting explicit rather than implicit communication, refusing to perform neurotypical social scripts, creating spaces where stemming and special interests and communication differences aren't pathologized, but simply are. All of these are counter practices emerging from and in response to, in my perspective, chronic and systematic invalidation. They're not deficits or failures to achieve neurotypical communication standards. They're sophisticated relational technologies developed by people who have learned through painful repetition that neurotypical social norms don't serve us and often actively harm us. So story circles like these, the literal practice of sitting together and sharing, these circles produce circles of stories that then circulate through communities. These circles are simultaneously sites of individual healing and recognition. They're social practices that create and maintain autistic community, and they're acts of refusal at institutional levels, challenging whose stories count as legitimate knowledge and whose are worth listening to. I want to be clear, though. While being misunderstood is a shared pattern of experience among autistic people, the specific risks and consequences are not distributed evenly. A Black autistic person's misunderstanding can have radically different and far more dangerous consequences than an white autistic person's might. Autistic people navigating multiple marginalized identities face compounded risks at every site of invalidation. And research on invisible chronic illness shows us how compound invalidation works in the cases of people who are managing multiple conditions simultaneously. Each individual condition becomes another site where your credibility is questioned. For autistic people with co-occurring conditions like fibro, hypermobility, spectrum syndromes, mast cell activation, POTS, and all of the other things that people like us tend to live with, the invalidation, they multiply. You're doubted about your autism, you're doubted about your physical symptoms, and the interactions between these conditions is often dismissed entirely. If you add race, gender, sexuality, class, immigration status, cultural background, and other axes of marginalization, the stakes of being misunderstood escalate dramatically. This is why any analysis of invalidation or discrimination or marginalization requires careful and deliberate consideration of how privilege and intersectionality shape these experiences. My own relative privilege as a white, male, educated person affords me protections that many other autistic people don't have. I can't speak from their positions, nor would I want to, but I can refuse to erase their stories and perspectives from my analysis and my writing. I can be transparent about what I can or can't see because of my identities and social positions. I can point directly and forcefully to the importance of their stories and perspectives. And I can practice citational justice so that I make sure that certain names start to circulate in those circles that we talked about because they just don't. These stories and these perspectives, they're the dark matter of autism discourse. We can't truly know autism without them. So in closing, I just want to bring us back to where we began with Keenan and Howardell's reminder about stories and by the telling, how they might become feathers. The stories I've been privileged to read and hear over the last several years, TNI that 14 autistic adults, and that number's growing now, shared with me in more than 50 hours of interviews. These are stories of profound suffering, but also of remarkable creativity, refusal and resilience. And resilience, I'll just say plainly, I wish we didn't have to be resilient. I'm kind of sick of that word, to be quite honest. These are stories of people who have been systematically discounted and dismissed, finding ways to recognize and validate one another. They're stories of transformation, not through individual therapies or medical interventions, but through collective witness and mutual recognition. The panic of misunderstood won't disappear through being recognized, but sometimes something shifts. The armor, the anchor, lead and stone, they don't vanish, but they might, through the telling, become something we can carry differently. And that's my presentation. I appreciate you for listening to all of this. But I wanted to make sure that I didn't take all of this up with my own story. I wanted to hear your stories of being misunderstood, what this panic looks like, what it feels like. And if you want to talk about music, we can talk about that too. But I'd ask you to consider the question that I asked in the beginning about what this Sessile Titan meant to you, what you thought it would be, what you hoped you might find out here. All of those are deeply meaningful to me because they tell me something about what misunderstanding and being misunderstood means to you. But we have plenty of time for questions and discussion now. There's no pressure at all, but I encourage you to speak. And I do have a prompt, a conversation starter, if no one has questions that they want to ask. Roger and Dawn, would you mind fielding the questions or doing that sequencing?
Yeah,
Is that okay?
so generally I remind people that they can wave in the frame or they can push the hand raising icon, especially today. We have, oh my gosh, we have, well, just a minute ago we had 170 people participating from around the world.
Oh my goodness.
And the great thing is, I mean, there's just resonance. Everybody's talking about how they've never felt so seen. And that's what I love this group for. Um,
I might
it's
cry, you
just,
guys. You got to watch
it's
out with that.
beautiful. It is. It's beautiful, Christopher. Oh, you've just really plucked a chord for people. So yeah, if you want a comment or a question read, just put read in the chat. So we'll try to get to it. There's probably going to be a lot of interaction. And again, wave or hand raising icon. And if you would please make sure you're on mute if you're not speaking, because a lot of us have auditory processing challenges. So yeah, I usually let Roger read the comments and call on people. So I'll turn
Great.
it over to him.
Thank you.
Okay, so we got several hands up. Let's start with, do you want to say something?
Yeah, hi Roger. Hi, Christopher and everyone. I relate to this topic, and I just wonder if you have feedback, Christopher or anyone, as a late diagnosed autistic who I'm going through a really severe burnout, trying to recover from a nervous breakdown, old school words. And I've found that my cognitive processing has been really impacted, and my ability to take in information of any kind um, has, it varies, but it's become much more limited, and I need slower speeds. And my sensory processing, which I've always had my whole life, has gotten very severe, what I have to limit. But my biggest issue with this is the one you mentioned last. It's family, people who love me, because I am different now. And I haven't actually revealed my autism diagnosis to my family because of the fear of having it invalidated. But I have, I've just tried to work around it and explain it. But here's an experience that I've had, and I wonder what you do if a family member, like I went to an event, it was a D&D game with my family, and my brother had changed all the rules. I came in, suddenly, I didn't know this was happening. All the rules were being changed. He was just orally trying to explain all these rules and telling us to write things down. and would get irritated if I asked a question because I didn't understand it. And in the past, yeah, maybe I could have kept up or it wouldn't have upset me. He's like, just write this number down here and we'll talk about it later. Like, not explain, like not being receptive to me, not understanding and needing a slower pace and wanting clarification and asking questions until finally I could feel a meltdown coming on. And I mean, I was already wearing my big sunglasses, everything that I usually do, and I had to just leave and go for a walk and cry for a while and do some stemming until I could come back. And then I put my earplugs in, put my glasses back on and waited. But he was so impatient, and he kept saying, you need to listen again, like blaming me. And I don't think he was willfully misunderstanding it, but it's hard when your capacity does fluctuate or has changed. So if anyone can speak to that would help.
Yeah, I really can relate to that. You disappeared, right? So
Yeah, I'll just put my hand up so you'll see me again, and then I'll take it down after you.
That's okay.
okay, I won't forget now. I'm losing track in the queue, but I just wanted to say, what I call the calculus of disclosure is there are no easy answers to that. Only you can know, I think. But again, you won't know how they'll respond without wading in. But in terms of the cognitive decline, yeah, I mean, I've lost the ability to read. I'm an academic. I've lost the ability to read during this project, and that was one of the things that happened that forced the break with my first supervisor. Even though I had disclosed that I was seeking and that I was an autistic person, even though I was still in the queue for diagnosis, none of that mattered. I couldn't do what she expected me to do the way she expected me to do it and when. So there was no tolerance at all for that. But I really can relate to that. But what I want to offer to you is that I've come to see that grief takes a lot of processing power. So some of that decline that we experience, I think, is really just due to the fact that we're simultaneously reevaluating our entire freaking lives through the lens of this new information that we just got. So I would say, even though I don't have an answer for that, I would offer or suggest that you be gentle with yourself in that regard. This is really hard and it's not fast. It goes on for a long time. I didn't cry for 25 years until I came to this work. And I wasn't even allowed to, according to myself, until after I got a diagnosis. But I've cried more since May than I've cried in most of my life, actually. There's grieving. It's a grief process. So just know that and know that it's okay. It doesn't answer the expectations of others, but we can be more gentle and loving with ourselves.
Okay, Joel. Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I've just said, well, I just got a sensory processing disorder diagnosis. Like, I feel like that will be more acceptable since he knows I had a nervous breakdown and things have changed. But everyone, the term autism, nobody wants to believe it. I've seen that. So, yeah, I'll keep working on it. But thank you, Christopher. I really appreciate it, and I resonate with your story a lot. Thank you.
I thank you for sharing, and just know that very anxiety you're navigating is one of the reasons that I'm doing what I'm doing. To help address that. We don't know jack shit, as a friend of mine put it, about autism. We don't know shit about it. People don't. So anyway.
Great.
Roger.
I love that we have so many hands up. And we have a gazillion comments as well. So this is awesome. But at the same time, I want to see how many folks we can give a turn as possible.
Yeah.
So would you like to go next?
Me?
Okay.
Yes.
So there's probably 2 or 3 of us named Hi. Makes me very nervous to speak, so I might be slow. And I raised my head right away, Christopher, because when I read the title of the presentation today, or the meeting, or whatever, immediately I knew what this was about. It is something that I've known my whole life. Well, since I started learning about social things. So, from when I was a kid, I guess. And the image in my mind is for me, it's to avoid this panic. That's how it works. I've never had a panic attack in my life. I'm a very reactive person, you know, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. I'm a fighter. If I'm in danger, I'll shout it out, I'll slap, I'll run away. And as I grew up, I avoided situations. I went around them. For anyone who's not seeing me on screen right now, I'm swerving, going around the obstacles to avoid that panic of being misunderstood, because it put me in awful, awful situations of all kinds. And some of them real physical danger. And so I just wanted to tell you that I'm very grateful.
And I am grateful to you also. Seriously, it takes a lot of courage to even speak. So thank you for that.
Would it be possible to stop screen sharing so we can see each other bigger?
Oh yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Let me just swerve a little bit so you can see what I was talking about. Going around, going, I'm gonna be misunderstood. Oh, this way and that way.
Great. Let me pivot to a question that was asked earlier if you in the chat, not to be read.
Okay.
Is it possible to say more about the concept of feeling understood?
Do you mean in the sense that I've mentioned that some academics were questioning whether that's even possible or whether that we should try? Or do you mean in a different sort of way? I don't know who asked the question.
Hi, do you want me to jump in and answer?
Yeah, please. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, whoever asked.
Hi, it's I was thinking about I'm autistic and a counselor, and I think a lot about the concept of feeling understood in the terms of like being known or validated or seen or those sorts of things, and it really differs, I think, from something like understanding knowledge, like understanding a concept, and it's hard for me often to kind of put into words what that's like, either as something maybe I hope to provide to others or something that's like important to me that maybe I wish for from, you know, close like friends or family or things like that. So yeah, I was wondering like that kind of more emotional or feeling of being understood versus like people's sort of cognitive understanding of like what autism could be. And does that make sense?
Yeah. It makes perfect sense. Thank you for that. I mean, for me, having had what they call a good mind most of my life, and then having that really changed dramatically at a certain point, really sort of made me reconsider the value of all of that sort of stuff and really think about things like cognition in the first place, understanding in that sense. And so, yeah, I understand what you mean. Like, I understand things at a conceptual level, but when it comes to feeling understood, the feeling is the operative term here. Like, people can say whatever they want, but they can't fake what they're feeling. And I'm one of those type of autistic people who can't help but feel what other people are feeling all the time. So that's what I've learned to go by. And I know 100% if someone gets what I'm saying or not on that level, despite the words that they say. There's a knowledge like that, but what you point to is sort of the limits of communication in the first place, verbal communication anyway. So we don't have good language for things that operate without outside the bounds of written or spoken language. So that's part of the problem. But trusting that feeling sense and helping people to understand that sense even exists and is operating and is worth listening to is part of the work. So as a counselor, that might be something that you have the space and the leeway to lean into a little bit. Does that make any sense at all? What you're saying? I mean, I'm just wading into this. I'm new to this, like so many of us, and I'm trying to make my way in this too. I hope that was helpful in some way.
Yes, thank you. I think I agree that it's the language is the part that is the challenge, and there's something that I don't have the words for, but I think I'm understanding what you're saying.
Well, I mean, that's partly what we're doing here through these kinds of things. We're trying to discover those things, to articulate those things, so we can talk to people about them.
I just wanted to jump in really quick as an autistic advocate and point out that sometimes empathy actually triggers aggression in people. And I think it's great that so many of us go more than halfway. I mean, we're socially gifted. That's one thing I've learned about us over the last many years, that we go way over halfway to meet people. And we should be aware of those cues that someone is willfully being aggressive because we are empathetic people. That's why we need each other to validate that is a good thing when we have to go out into the world without each other.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Dawn. I mean, it's 100% true. I mean, for me, it's like I'm just trying to be authentic with the person in front of me, but it's some people are very threatened by being seen like that. So that's a great reminder. And actually, you just helped me understand partly why I have so many problems in certain kinds of situations. So thank you for that.
Would you like to go next?
Yes, I would. Thank you very much. I like case examples. It helps me to understand things better. I'm going to throw a couple out right now. I'm years old. When I was 18 months old, I had taken so much belittlement and insulting from my mother that I would explode into a violent rage. And by the time I was 18 months old, I knew the difference between a tantrum and rage. I knew the word rage very well. And when I would explode in rage, usually I would hit my head against the wall until my scalp bled. My mom and my dad would start making ridiculing remarks about how I was throwing a tantrum. And I was enraged. And I knew the difference. And I thought, well, they should know the difference. But so now, very early on, I'm being misunderstood. And in this case, it's not a willful act on their part. There's simply ignorance. If you go back in history and you read the popular media, the so-called World Wide Web of the 1950s and 60s and into the 70s, it's really very little different than what people have to go on today. It just came in print media, weekly and monthly subscriptions. So that was my first experience that I can recall offhand of being misunderstood. And then now we're going to go forward to where it becomes pathological and worse. So there became a point where my mom would say to me, "You don't think that. You don't want that. You don't feel that. I'll tell you what you want. I'll tell you what you think. I'll tell you what you feel." Now this is going way beyond misunderstood. This goes beyond gaslighting. I don't even know what to call it, but this is what violence.
It's abuse.
Well, yeah, it's more subtle than violence, but it is a form of violence. Stop. Okay. Then, interestingly, I was hospitalized at age 9 for about a week or so from gastritis due to worrying, which I only very recently learned is not unusual for an autistic kid to worry greatly to the point of sickness. When I got out, I was given approximately 8 hours of testing at my grammar school. And in the next room, they were going over the scores. And what I heard was, "Oh my God, this is impossible. How can this be?" And I was subsequently told that I was at risk of being institutionalized with the schizophrenics. And then I was given a reprieve in which I was told, "Well, because you talk so well and you sound so intelligent, we're not going to do anything," which is exactly what they did, other than sending me to see a psychiatrist. And you want to talk about not being understood. Age 9, I'm trying to describe my experience as a psychiatrist. The only thing he wanted to hear was anything that fit the Freudian dogma, or the American Psychiatric Association dogma, take your pick. And so, fast forward to the present time, something I learned, one of the hardest phrases of 3 words I've ever learned to say are the words, "I don't understand." And my God, it's like, it's better than saying "I love you." Just tell somebody, "I don't understand," and say it honestly, shows that you care about that person, you respect that person, and you have the backbone to put up with potential backlash for even daring to say those 3 words. Because where I grew up, if you said, "I don't understand," what I was being hit with from teachers, parents, whoever, was, "You're a liar, we're going to punish you, you know damn well what we're talking about." And so, I'm not saying this in defense of the people who choose not to understand. I'm simply trying to clarify the playing field we're all on together, regardless of what side we're on. And anyhow, I wanted to mention those things because they're very important to me, and I imagine somebody else might be able to relate. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm just going to start by saying I'm very sorry. And I really can relate to that sort of thing. I think there are a couple of things to consider here, historically speaking, that really matter. And that's definitely showed up in my research, is looking at, they're not really case studies, but just looking at patterns in things like age cohort in my study, for example, relative to things like the development of autism as a diagnostic phenomenon in the first place. So, autism didn't enter the DSM until 1980. So our parents, and I'm not at all excusing these behaviors, but there was no fluency. There was no conversation about these sorts of things at all. And when you consider also that the fact that certainly in my case and in the case of many people that I've spoken with, the issue of undiagnosed autism or neurodivergence in those family systems is also something to take into account. So it's the grieving complex, like the process is very complex in that regard, because it's really hard to separate some of these things. And it doesn't excuse anyone. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I'm saying that we might come to, and to use the language of our talk today, understand those situations a little bit differently if we can zoom out a little bit and consider all of these things happening. They don't take away the harm that was done us. It doesn't take any of that away. But I found through my reevaluation of my very complicated relationship with my mother after her passing, that I now feel a little differently about all of it. So that's my answer to that. Oh, there's so many conversations happening. I wish I could just absorb them all. It's incredible.
Hey.
I see so many interesting comments and conversations popping up in the chat. Please, someone jump in.
Or maybe I'm mispronouncing that. Can you tell me how it's pronounced?
It's okay. It's not spelled the same, right? Are you guys getting feedback? I'm hearing feedback in my headphones. Or no, is it coming out clear?
You sound good to
It's
me.
clear.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I don't know, there's so many things I want to talk about. um, so first is when I saw the advertisement on Facebook, I was like, oh my god, because um talking to people, I'm saying, okay, I feel invalidated, I don't feel seen, I don't feel heard. Even saying, okay, I have autism, all of that, and it's not spoken about, in the autism circles, because I ended up finding out about my autism because my daughter was diagnosed with autism. So that's how I'm like, oh, that's why I do that. That's why I do that. Now I understand, right? But it took a while for me to get diagnosis, because of the price, because of finding the right professional. Like, also part of me was like, should I even be diagnosed? Like, what's the point to it? Um,
Yeah.
but it's been the best thing I've ever done in my life. It's, it's like put everything into context. But I wanted to talk about the medical invalidation because I have had so many symptoms and always going to the doctor and it's like, no, you're fine. You're fine. Your labs are fine. Everything is fine. Right? And so I ended up becoming a nurse in order to, I feel like, deal with the medical trauma that I've had throughout my whole entire life to try to like kind of resolve it, right? In some way, or maybe do it differently. But I feel like I ended up like having such difficulty being a nurse because then they are forced to perpetuate to continue the cycle because if I speak out of all of the things that I've learned so far, I can put my license in jeopardy. Like I can't be talking about the stuff that really matters that I've seen that I've researched because it's not common practice, and it feels like here I am, like, trying to even figure out what to do. Do I go into different fields? Do I, just like change careers? Because it is like so difficult for me, especially being an autism parent, of seeing the mothers talk about their kids with such invalidation. It just like hurts me to the core. Of like, I'm like, do you not understand? I sometimes want to get them, like, shake them, like, what are you doing to your kid? Like they're not
Yes.
reacting because they're being bad. They don't need medication for schizophrenia. When I heard that a
Yeah.
4-year-old was receiving Haldol,
Oh my goodness.
I cried for hours. Like I cried maybe 3-4 hours nonstop because I could not believe that this is happening. Because
Yeah.
missing the point completely. So I don't know. I just wanted to, like explain the struggle that I've been having and seeing all this, but I don't know. It's very important that you came with this conversation because I haven't seen it anywhere. I mean, and I'm like deep into the autism, community, the organizations, everything, and it's like not even once I've seen this. And even when I try to express to people in organizations that I was diagnosed with autism, it's like a validation, like right off the bat. It's like, oh no, you just have difficult and like whatever, they were able to absorb. Like you don't really have autism, like kind of like
Yeah.
I don't know, like who
Yeah.
diagnosed you? Like this is like crazy, People supposed to be experts or really
Right.
yeah. So
Well,
Thank you. I relate to you on so many levels. I have two children of my own. They're 25 and almost 20. And the experiences, the things that I've heard assessors and physicians say to them, to us, I mean, absurd is the only word I can come up with. I mean, it's unbelievable the kinds of things that happen, actually. And I can't tell you how many stories like this that I've heard from people. Probably half of my study population came through a disability advocacy researchers network. So these are people that are in institutions working like you're talking about. One person relayed to me a story that they overheard the clinician explaining to the parents joyfully and happily that their kid was only on the edge, that they would be able to mask most of everything so nobody could tell that they were autistic. And they were selling that as a wonderful thing. as a palliative. So the fact that we have a giant ocean of literature on the costs of masking already, no one is paying attention. So it's both surprising and unsurprising for you to say to me, no one's talking about what I'm talking about here today in those spaces. Um, but we're talking about it together behind the scenes. We are. So, and I also want to call out something else that comes up, and it's not really, as a parent, I discovered, if you're not in online spaces involved with autism discourses. So there's different things that are happening there. So the divisions between, say, social and medical models, for example, those are really hot in social media spaces. But I find people on the ground are less, they're not talking about that as much. And some of them are less aware that these conversations are even happening in the first place. So again, we're invisible. We're invisible as autistic people, and even people diagnosed by some of the seminal figures, the critical figures in autism research, like Monique Botha, for example, psychologist working with critical realism approaches, diagnosed by Simon Baron-Cohen, told in her own department of psychologists that she lacks the authority to comment on her own experience, much less autism. You know, so these kinds of things are everywhere. So what we're really up against is people not actually seeing us as full human beings in the first place. And I don't mean to be overly dramatic, but what else can I make of this? All of these behaviors, when taken together, what do they communicate? And that's what they communicate to me. So that's why I'm here, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, and that's why I'm doing this the way that I'm doing it. We need all of us doing whatever we're doing, and you're all doing that in some way. So I encourage you to stay with it because we need each other.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much.
I also wanted to mention that people have been asking about where do we carry the conversation on. Generally, we do that under, I think this is going to definitely go places. We do that under the advertisement for the session on Facebook, and then I don't participate so much in the other social media we have because it's too much for me. But you can carry on the conversation. Roger will. We'll put the links to that. And also, I think there is a way that we can preserve the chat for people to read in the future. And once we have a chance to anonymize the videos, we always put them on our channel. So I'll be posting links to that on our social media. Oh, thanks, Roger. Roger just put up the links if you want to keep going after the time. Okay.
Would you like to go next?
Hi, thank you. Thank you to Christopher and to all of you who have been involved in setting this up. This is the enormity of how much we all need this is evident in just the fact that logging on to this, my entire body started shaking and it's still shaking, and that comes from, I think, Christopher, the beautiful way that you put the embodied invalidation is just, you know, I'm years and years and years, lifelong trauma. So talking about all these things and bringing it out in the open is so important, but it's difficult as well. So I'm Brazilian. I was raised moving around. I moved 13 times by the time I was 18, went to 11 different. Yeah, so I learned, I'll turn my video on. I've learned to mask. I learned to mask very, very well and quickly, very early on. I didn't really even, autism didn't even really come into my mind until I had children, as a lot of us late diagnosed autistics. I knew there was something different with my son's development, but he was not classically presenting as autistic or ADHD, even though I could tell that he had struggles. He's now, my youngest child is they have both been diagnosed autistic. I split up with their father for various reasons, but one of the reasons, big reasons, was our parenting approaches. I do believe that he is autistic as well, but refuses to kind of go into that sphere. I think it's a family thing with him and his family, that kind of psychology and mental health, any of those types of things are kind of taboo, unfortunately. And then so that actually speaks to what some people have been talking about with autistic people who don't know they're autistic. And so, we all have differences in rigid thinking, and so you can have people that have rigid thinking and not realize that they're displaying rigid thinking. And then Christopher, like you talked about how we were talking about parents and family members who, autism, there is a genetic link. We know that there are markers. So if you're autistic, chances are there are other people in your family that are autistic, but they might not know they're autistic. And so, knowing that and thinking about it, and, maybe reflecting on how that might show up in your family members. Like you said, Christopher, it does not excuse bad behavior. It never excuses bad behavior, but it might explain. And just as there are, rude, horrible people in any other kind of demographic, of course, there's going to be rude, horrible people that are autistic as well. I mean,
Absolutely.
one must.
Absolutely. People are still
right?
people, yes.
Yeah, so we're not all amazing, wonderful, empathetic people, like a lot of us are. But yeah, so I eventually split with my ex, and was starting to, be an independent person. I think I was like 30 when I split with him, and it was the first time in my life that I was an independent person standing on my own 2 feet, because it's hard. It's really hard. I got employment. Eventually I started working in schools, and it was very clear very quickly in whatever school that I was in that I was kind of the difficult child whisperer. And so I eventually became like a one-to-one to a lot of children, but the difficulty in those settings were that I did not have any authority. I did not have any credible, like, actual training to be in a position of authority within that environment. And so I was always spoken over, and even when they gave me training, everyone else always seemed to know better. So I had at one point a little boy, a 4-year-old little boy, that's the youngest that they go into. I live in now. Children start school this September after they turn 4. So this little boy was black, 4-year-old, gorgeous, lovely little boy, but autistic. So, and in I know in the United States there's level 1, 2, 3. I don't agree with having those. But he would be whatever level 3 would be, I think, in the United States. So he would, have meltdowns when he was being forced to do things, or when things were being taken from him by teachers, because he had to, do what everyone else was doing, etc. And I was having to witness this. I became his one-to-one, and I actually knew a little bit of a kind of sign language called Makaton. With my youngest child, I had done sign language with them when they were a baby, just for enhancement, and for our own kind of relationship. And I,
Beautiful.
yeah, it was beautiful. So on a walk, she was in her
pram. They were in their pram, and I think they were before speaking age, so just over the age of 1, and they started doing this, and I didn't notice until I heard birdsong, and this is the sign for birds. So yeah, it was, but because I had that knowledge, I thought they were trying to use PEX cards with this child, and he was not giving any kind of eye contact, even, towards what we were trying to show him. So I started doing simple signs with him consistently, and one day he was doing what I knew he was trying to communicate: to go for a walk, because I would sometimes be allowed to take him for a walk on his own outside on the school grounds, and I was absolutely elated. He was actually communicating. He had started making little bits of eye contact. I was mirroring him when he was playing. I would kind of go next to him and do what he was doing, and he looked at me with like absolute wonder and surprise that I had joined his world. Now, when I started sharing these things with the teacher, there was kind of feigned, like, oh, but clearly I had stepped on her toes. And so, after I shared the thing about walking, we were never allowed to go out and walk on the grounds again. So I had to, I stopped being in teaching assistant roles because I couldn't. I eventually have been diagnosed with fibromyalgia, with chronic fatigue syndrome, and I know that it is embodied invalidation. It's a lifetime's worth of trauma. Unfortunately, I've just had more trauma, so I was in the family law courts here. My husband took me to court. I was, the primary caregiver for both my children their whole lives up until the divorce. There's another person involved in the reason why this was taken to court, but going through the court system as an autistic person I would not wish that on anyone, and I didn't know I was autistic, so,
oh my goodness.
Yeah, so on my first day of giving evidence, I was asked a question, and obviously I gave all of the information, and
right.
part of the information was something that shined a negative light on me accidentally, and it was information that I didn't need to have given, but obviously made me look bad in front of the judge. And the next day in the morning, I was still continuing my evidence, and I broke down. I completely broke down. I had an amazing legal team, thankfully, who completely understood. I had, they were on my side the entire time anyway, with regards to the reason why we were going to court. But I said, like, I cannot go on. I think I need to be evaluated on whether I'm autistic, because I had been thinking about it for a couple years, and I was like, I cannot continue giving evidence in this way. So the judge was very annoyed. She said, oh, well, I have to accept this now, because if I don't, then she's just going to appeal, isn't she? That one day that I was giving evidence, the judge was like rolling her eyes and like nodding her head, and just the experience of an antagonistic other barrister questioning me, making it seem, before I even had a chance to answer, just the way that they're asking the question is like, you're so stupid as to have done this and this, aren't you? And that just, it's horrendous. So there was a court order involved that I had to not breach certain things, and I breached certain things because I had taken certain things literally. I would have asked questions to be clarified, and they weren't clarified like enough. And then they would accuse me of deliberately not understanding or trying to get around, and my ex-husband obviously put that all in his basket. In her final ruling, the judge said, I'm really sorry to even share this story. But in the final ruling, the judge, mentioned other things about me that had no relevance to the ruling. Like, she mentioned that has nothing to do with my children. My children don't even know. And she said, I acknowledge that she is autistic, but and then 2 paragraphs later, it's like, she should have known, blah, 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 blah. So it's like, I'm not autistic enough, but I'm too autistic at the same time. When we came back with my autism diagnosis, after I asked for that, they said, to be able to give evidence, she needs to know the questions beforehand. She needs to be given her own time to fully answer the questions, and she needs more breaks. So basically, I gave evidence for 6, I think almost 7 days. I would waffle on trying to answer a question, and then the judge would stop me and be really annoyed and tell my barrister, look, we need to stop. It was, yeah, like I said, I would not wish that experience on anyone. But I guess I just want to say thank you so much, Christopher, for literally every single word of what you shared with us. It's so important and necessary. And yeah, thank you.
Oh, no, thank you. My wife she was born and lived there the first few years of her life. But, there's a point when you just know, you can't deny it, and we have autistic children, and that's me too. And so, we recognize ourselves through others very often. But I did want to say that one of my study participants is also Brazilian American, and for them, they're ADHD also.
Yeah.
So in their family,
Yes, same. In their family, they can talk about being ADHD, but they cannot talk about being autistic at all. The word is a no-go at all. So that goes back to your question earlier, your comments earlier, that there's really no way to know the risks. You kind of got to do a little detective work to find out where people are, and it's tricky, and it's touch and go, and it's anxiety inducing, and all of those things, and sometimes it will be disastrous, but there really isn't any other way to know where people stand.
Yeah.
And that's one of the
really unfortunate things, and for me, that's why education and advocacy really matters so much, is because autism is a stereotype, and we know so little of what it actually might be. So, I just encourage you to stay the course, to know that you're not alone. This has been transformative for me to do this work, to find community. And I've heard that happen. I've heard that from many people that I've spoken with. They were considering, they found a community of people predominantly online, and then there's this. And we change, we grieve, and we're angry, and we should be. We should be sad, we should be angry, all of those things, because a life of knowing ourselves we didn't have that opportunity. So we just didn't have an opportunity to make different kinds of choices. And I don't know about you, but there are many sort of situations and shapes in my life that wouldn't necessarily be this way had I known. So I just offer my compassion in response. And I hope that you find a way to do that thing that you do. My wife also works with children. She works for a Montessori school, and she's
also
the odd kid whisperer. She has personal experience. When you deal with your own children and yourself, you can appreciate those things. And that's the kind of knowledge. The Dutch have a term for this. They take lived experience and lived expertise seriously enough to have words for them specifically. There's ervaringskennis and ervaringsdeskundigheid. They're basically like the expertise. There's the lived knowledge, the things that you know as a result of living, and then there's the expertise that you develop as a result of knowing those things. And that's where I'm leaning in with my work is let's lean into that. There's precedent in medical anthropology. We have Arthur Kleinman's work on explanatory models, for example, and how those operate in a clinical relationship. And that's where bias happens, right? That's where physicians, you find out they had a week on autism and little white boys who play with trains in their training, and that's it. They really don't know anything about us.
And there's
Only one way to know us, and that's by us telling you about us.
And
So-
being listened to. Yeah.
That's
I'm
right.
I'm part of
I
a
just
Facebook.
want to jump
And really quick, sorry, I don't mean to
interrupt.
you. We usually have a hard stop at an hour and a half. Maybe today we can go over a little bit since there are a lot of people who haven't gotten a chance. But I do want everyone who wants a chance to have a chance. So maybe if we could get in as many, I don't want to cut people off, but if we could get as many in as possible, that would be great.
Just to
Good.
wrap up, I just want to say I'm part of a Facebook group called Autistic Researchers Researching Autism, and I just wanted to shout that out because it's a really great group.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for the mention. I'm there too.
Great. Would you like to go next?
Yeah, and Don, and Roger, just a second. I blocked out a block of time, so just in case. So I understand you guys have other obligations to attend to, but I'm available. So
I am as well. Usually I actually introduce the idea for a hard stop because I get really tired because I have
yeah,
auditory processing. But this is fantastic, and I think people need this. I've seen so many people come to this group and just heal, just being immersed in our culture. So these moments are really important.
sorry, I forgot who was speaking just then, Roger.
Sorry, is still there? If not, we can go to. I'm sorry.
I'm here. I'm just trying to. I'm on my phone, so I'm just trying to figure out how to make this thing work. I'm at work too, so like as soon as you called my name, I went to more private space. I was trying to pull up the video so you can see my face, but I can't get that done, and for set time's sake, I won't bother with it. I myself am. I'm a late diagnosed autistic. And it has been a journey, because there is so much misinformation, and then when you're trying to convey like what you're feeling, even though as you had said, Christopher, that you don't often know what you're feeling, and as somebody else said, other people tell you what you're not feeling and what you actually are feeling, and what you mean to be saying and what you're not saying, and it creates this this seems like it creates this endless loop of trying to figure out who you are and how you fit in. And when you're trying to accept a diagnosis, or you're trying to accept who you are, it makes it very difficult, especially when you talk about those like family and friends and healthcare and education and health, as you're trying to navigate that, but everybody seems to be so dismissive. And so then you're scared to put yourself out there to try to say, this is who I think I am, and this is what I'm trying to navigate. And yet you get so much pushback. I've disclosed to a couple of people. I've tried to disclose at work for the sake of accommodations, and I'm part. I even stepped down in a leadership position at my church because of it. Because it's just like, it just feels like rejection. And I don't know where I don't really. And so we
talk about trying to convey a thought, but it takes so much time sometimes for us ourselves to understand what it is that we are feeling and what this interaction with this person or this system means, that by the time we get around to finally saying, oh, I think I understand, we've already been pushed to the side and dismissed, and your comment and your question, your thought is no longer necessary. And it's like, so it's, I think that's part of the difficult for me, and I'm only just having this diagnosis about a year and a half, and I don't feel like I'm anywhere near at the end of this. If anybody's familiar with the 5 stages of grief, yeah, I mean, having this diagnosis, it feels like you go back and forth from denial to what's the one, the debating, the negotiating. There we go, the negotiating, and it's just, how are we supposed to accept ourselves if we're met with such resistance on so many levels? I don't know. That makes any sense. But
Yeah, it makes, it makes
perfect sense. And I mean, that's why I was talking about circles and cycles, because that process of coming to know, the grieving process, all of that stuff. I mean, it's not a straight line, it's a spiral connected at the ends, kind of, so far as how it feels to me. And that's actually one of the other things that I loved about that Anzaldúa piece, the Now Let Us Shift piece, is because she sort of traces a path through what she calls conocimiento, which is like this special kind of knowing. It's a consciousness. It's like a self-knowledge. It has multiple meanings, like everything she wrote. And that's on purpose, because that's one of my difficulties as an autistic person with writing or any other thing, is I'm trying to say 20 things that go together
in one sentence.
And it's impossible to do that and be understood, so
Like,
that's part of it.
for sure.
Go ahead, please.
I really do agree with that, because in my brain, everything's connected. And trying to convey that to other people, they're just like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm like, but how do you not see the interconnections between these things, that they all affect, and you can't just compartmentalize these things? That's not how it works.
No. I mean, how do you explain to someone that there is no out there? If you can't see that, how do you explain that to someone? So I think that some people, I don't know, for whatever reason, they can't go there, and that's okay. That's okay. But one thing I would offer to you in your process, something that's been helpful for me, and perhaps it's because of my children also watching them, and defending them in these clinical settings over and over also, is that this process, this journey, all of this, and not just the formal diagnosis, although that gave me a kind of permission I didn't really even know I was waiting for. But the process itself has made me simultaneously more gentle and more fierce. So that ferocity is something we can use that I don't know about everyone. We're all built a little bit differently. But for me, I lean into that because there's more energy and anger and fury than there is in depression and apathy. And I've spent plenty of time there in those spaces to know the difference. And that's fine too. We have to go there to know. And that's how you actually can relate to someone else who's in that space too, is what it feels like in your particular body, right?
So
just hearing someone just say,
hey, I see
you, that really matters. It's mattered tremendously for me and for a lot of the people that I've talked to.
That's actually quite validating, because we are taught to run away from those. If you're angry, you're upset, your frustration, those are negative. Run away from them. Do not. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Thank you.
By the way, we often use the term neuroholographic in place of autistic here, because of that very phenomenon where everything is so inextricably connected that it's essentially conscious and holographic, a conscious holographic universe that we live in.
Yeah, and that's a little bit problematic, and I'm sure a lot of folks here can relate. I mean, one of the things I'm doing with my research is I'm using a wide variety of theorists and thinkers to trace this architecture, and that in itself is problematic in the academy when you're expected to drill down deeply on one or two or maybe three theorists in your own work and sort of articulate how they map. But if you're a pattern reader, or someone like me who sees flows and forces interacting and connections like you're describing, like and the neuroholographic bit also, Don, then that doesn't work. You're limited by having to choose. So how do you show that something different happens when you think with this and this and this and this that like might look to you like they're not connected, but are deeply and fundamentally connected. So people resist us because of what we represent in that regard. We represent a holistic perspective in a lot of ways, and we don't shy away from things like fault, and that's not really the right word, but accountability might be a better word. We don't shy away from those things, I find. Me, I want to own my misdeeds and errors because then I can learn from them. Because what I was trained and socialized to do just doesn't at all work for me. So we have to find our own way. And every single person here can describe their process of having to find their own way to this moment right now. And that's one of the most powerful things I think that connects us all is that
We
work.
come into these things with this is my opinion, that autistic slash neuroholographic people come into these things with a fundamentally different assumption that everyone is on the same page in wanting everyone to thrive. And so here are my strengths and weaknesses, and what are yours, and how do we become larger than the sum of the parts? Because then everyone begins to be fulfilled. Whereas, overgeneralizing, I realize, but in neuronormative society, everything is based on hierarchy and who can hurt you and suspicion and what you can get from people. And so, of course, studies have shown the minute we walk up to a neuronormative person, they know, they feel it. The studies are incredible. Like within microseconds, they have tagged us with outrageous levels of prejudice to follow.
Yeah,
It's really incredible to see in the data.
indeed. Indeed. Someone else? There's a lot of hands still.
Would you like to go next?
Oh gosh, thank you so much. First of all, Chris, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, and that was an amazing presentation, and I'm so glad I had the time to make it. Thank you. I wanted to actually respond to something Dawn said earlier about being actually socially gifted. When I heard that, I was like, "Ooh, yay, resident social scientist here. I have something to contribute." But it actually ties into the autistic standpoint theory in my book that you, Chris, helped me put together and develop through our conversations outside. And so I wanted to say that yes, Dawn, you are spot on. We are the socially gifted creatures here, and the way that colonialism works, it's structured specifically to cater to the lowest common denominator. So the whole reason why I kind of developed the autistic standpoint theory as kind of a one-off of feminist theory and their standpoint theory. See, feminist theory points out that the patriarchy caters to the lowest common denominator to basically benefit the lowest common denominator and keep all of us oppressed. But our social habits, our social skills, our social norms does the same thing. And so when I went back to college a couple of years ago and was looking at the social sciences, I was like, I want to study neurotypicals because all of our research, it's all from inside that box, right?
So what happens if you actually like turn that box around or think outside the box, and then you're looking in at neurotypical? And what I found through the last 3 years is that yes, all of our social skills, all our norms are entirely dysfunctional. They're structured to basically keep us in low social emotional development. And if you look at our society, you look at the fact that we're not funding social emotional skills in schools. You look at the fact that Denmark modeled their school system after us in the 1970s, and they're doing so much better because they kept that component in. You start to realize that actually they're trying to keep us dumbed down. And so that's kind of, what my book is about. We've talked about this, but I did want to point out that Dawn, you're entirely right. We are the gifted ones. And one of our gifts actually is understanding. This ties into the telepathy tapes. I think that that is actually a inherent skill that we have. They talk about how in India, before they were colonized, people in India could float off the ground and read minds and do all sorts of crazy things. So, what if that's actually a ability that we do have to understand each other? I personally think that the academics saying that it's not possible to understand fully or inside that colonial box still, and I would argue that it takes climbing out of the box in order to get there, but it is entirely possible. Personally, I've had to refine my intuition in a fight or flight process, and I've found that it's led me to have I don't know, higher understandings or being more in tune with that holographic reality. I think that that holographic reality is an excellent way to put it because it really does just overlap understanding, and it's kind of like a spiral. But I think that ultimately, what it comes down to is that our society is structured to keep us gaslit into thinking that we're the problem. And in reality, it's society that is the issue. And I think that it's really, really important to start kind of like flipping that coin around and showing that back at society. I think that that's actually one of our superpowers as autistic people, is that we have the ability to reflect that back and say, hey, no, not according to our experience. I also think that that's also why we're being targeted right now by the oppressive government. What we have, really, socially speaking, is a relational species. Humans are relational, but we're in a closed system, so it's basically like putting a fishbowl on top, and it's preventing our growth. I recently, for my final, did a study comparing Uganda to the United States, and what is interesting about Uganda is that they don't have adolescence like we do in the United States. Adolescence is actually a cultural phenomenon. It's not an actual human stage of development. It's inherently tied to cultures that are individualistic and also fairly well-to-do economically. But when you look at Uganda, their adulthood, it starts at like 30, but they're considered an adolescent or a kid until like 30. They don't have this middle stage. And colonialism, capitalism, they've kind of broken down the human being into these marketable categories, but it's also like breaking down the ways that we relate to each other as well. So I think that has a lot to do with your talk, and we can obviously talk about this more. I look forward to our future conversations, but I just wanted to thank you so much for inspiring me in my own work, because what you are doing is so important. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's great to hear from you. I'm glad you could make it. Yeah, there's a lot there for sure. There really is a lot there. So I just wanted to respond to one little piece of it, because we've talked a little bit about like why Goffman? Why Bourdieu? Why Foucault? Why Gramsci? Well, I've recently sort of come to why I think that might be, and it's because Gramsci was preceding all of that stuff, but hegemony is kind of like fascia that holds everything together. But Bourdieu, Foucault, Goffman, they were all developing these theories while what I'm calling the architecture of impossibility was being developed in relation to autism, mental health, diagnostic trees, decisions, healthcare, all of that stuff. So they were articulating these structures being built as they were happening. And so that's why I find them particularly useful for articulating how we got to where we are right now, at least in the context of autism policy and representation. And so that's what I've been doing, is to say, hey, look, let me show you. You had this commentary on this piece and you've accepted that. We now talk about surveillance in various ways. We talk about discipline in different ways. We talk about internalizing the panopticon so we manage ourselves. That's what masking is. It's a form of internalized discipline. So they don't have to do that work anymore, but the system is breaking. And so the system has had to reassert itself through, and that's what we're seeing right now. But these are cycles that scholars have been tracing already. So we have a map, if you would. It's almost like the evildoer's guidebook, kind of. So we can use that to help us articulate in effective ways what they're actually doing and what the costs are. And hopefully we can, through that, point out how, pardon my French, but fucking ridiculous and horrible it all is in the first place. And not just that, because I was trained that critique for the sake of critique, solely for the sake of critique, is just vanity. You have to offer something else. Where are we going? What are some possible solutions? And that's where we are right now, as we're coming up with those things right now. People have been articulating this map and this terrain for quite some time and doing it elegantly and eloquently in a variety of ways.
Great. Would you like to go next?
Hi, thank you. I'm calling from, although I suspect a few people might be in similar situations. And I know in the past people in places of authority have misunderstood my reactions or things. And so I am concerned about all the armed people we have around now. I don't want to make anything political. It's a genuine concern.
No, please.
I've had a few incidences now, like I bumped into someone with a very large gun. I was approached by about 5 armed individuals at one point that just, we just stood there and it looked like I was supposed to say something, but I had no idea what. Things like this, and I worry with this concept of being misunderstood and that sort of thing. What in your research have you seen as kind of a safety guideline would you recommend for being seen as not a threat, for being seen as not quote-unquote weird or unusual, other than just masking in situations like this? What would be safety guidelines you may have come across?
Well, that's an impossible question to answer, like in a sort of formulaic way, because every situation is different, and that's why I spent a little bit of time talking about intersecting identities, because those risks, that calculus is very different depending on the person doing it, right? Yeah, I know this is dark terrain, but the risks are very real. And that's one of the things that we have to communicate to the broader public, is like, hey, just like other marginalized people, we are the objects of violence very often. So how do we navigate that? I don't know. But one of the ways we can shift that over time, and it will take a long time, apparently, based on what's happening here, is just repetition to say, hey, look, this is happening. This is happening. This is happening. And it's not just happening to certain kinds of people either. It's happening to a lot of kinds of people. And that right there is probably what will make the difference eventually. In my reading of historical patterns and empire and regime change, it's something like that that's generally happened that is the catalyst or the final straw for some sort of systemic change. And I can't guarantee that that will be the case. And so I know this is a non-answer, but that's what I see is happening. We're in the middle of an empire collapse. We're at that 250, 300 year point in the history of this nation. And that's where we are. So it's going to be messy, I think. And it's going to be messy for a while and maybe uglier before it gets any prettier, unfortunately. So thank you for bringing us to that level of reality, because that's where I spend a lot of time there.
Yeah, thank you for answering my question, and also thank you to the chat. I realize this has been triggering for some people there, so thank you for your
sorry.
Yeah, and likewise, I apologize for speaking candidly.
Would you like to go next?
She said, not really.
Okay, no problem. We'll go to
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm
So
well, thanks.
that's good. That was an automatic question. Socially conditioned question. I'm really sorry.
The response to it's okay. I get it.
I know, because I moved to Ireland and everyone says it, and they say, "What's the crack?" And I have no idea what kind of response they expect. So I just fell into line there. But there you go. It's kind of made me relax a little bit. So, so I'm 2 years old. I'm late diagnosed ADHD with CPTSD and dissociation. Quite a high ACE score. Early experiences of being very academic at school, being hyper-focused on learning, enjoying learning, and being very immersed in that, but being very damaged socially in terms of kind of teachers laughing at you when you'd cry if you were socially overwhelmed. You know, the too much sensory experience, going to like classrooms too noisy, or you don't know what you were to be in the right. So that was really, really, really troubling growing up. But I actually went into mental health nursing, qualified. Partially because I met somebody that did the job, told me a little bit about it, and I thought that'd be fantastic. Learn a bit about people, their experiences, kind of also just that kind of sense of compassion for suffering, understanding that people go through really troublesome times, and often they do the best they can with the toolkit that they've got, but they're not really sure how to embody something different, you know. So that was great in terms of learning about body language, facial expressions, you know, cynicism if somebody does this, the frown for in case somebody's going, like, you know, the horseshoe for grief, or yeah, it was great for that. It was great because I could sit with somebody for an hour, you could really grill them. Any other social situation where you kind of say, can I get into your shoes? It's just not felt as being safe. It's too intrusive. It kind of crosses those boundaries. But being a nurse was great because I could really sit down with somebody and say, kind of, this is what I'm hearing. Does that mirror what your experience was, or can you fill the gaps in for me? And it was great to be able to do that. But what I did experience throughout that process was lots of harm from working in the mental health setting. It was witnessing other people. I didn't know I was neurodivergent when I first qualified as a nurse, but witnessing other people that had similar kind of ways of experiencing the world as me, being violated, being abused, being deprived of their liberty or their autonomy. So I felt like it was great that I was in a position where I could advocate for those people. But I felt like I was bumping my head against the wall a lot of the time. And there's actually a program on the television in the UK, which is where I qualified and worked, called Panorama, which is an expose, and it kind of somebody going in with these cameras to expose what's going on, and it was horrific. Some of the things that were going on, people that were neurodivergent with a history of trauma, being made to sleep on the floor, being deprived medication, being sorry if this is triggering for anyone. I really do. I should have said that before I'm done. I just kind of my ADHD tablet's wearing off, so the pause is not quite where it would have been this morning. So just to continue on that thread, that was really triggering for me because I felt like I was kind of on the wrong side of the fence, feeling like any time I did speak up for people, I was marginalised in my own way. And then whenever I did kind of communicate to psychiatrists that were my line managers that I felt I was neurodivergent, I felt like I looked at them like I had two heads. And that sense of embodied invalidation, I feel like I'm now experiencing this anger of only knowing myself through somebody else's eyes, that inversion of phenomenology. You know, that sense of like, if I can experience inverted qualia, like, is your red my red, then why is somebody not able to kind of, why have I got to do all the work to fill the gap so that I can say, well, you know, because being misunderstood to me feels like death now. And I'll tell you why that is. It's because I've been met with these strange responses, such as a colleague might say to you, "You don't come into work to make friends," and I'd be so sad about that because I'd be like, "I really do," you know. But clearly, the way that I engage with people, because they didn't have the same interests as me, you know, might have been perceived as, you know, I just didn't have that insight and awareness at the time. Or I might say something in a meeting and then somebody else says the exact same thing that I perceive to be the exact same thing, and then their response is received in a way that's like, "Oh yeah, you know, there's some kind of response, positive response back." I could never work out, like, I just said that. I literally just said that. And that's okay. It's not as if I need that validation, but what this eternal curiosity of like, why is it when I articulate it that it doesn't land in the same way? I just can't fill that space to, you know, kind of get that sense of, right, what is it? If I need to be heard in a way that resonates like it seems to do for other people, I just don't understand what that looks like. And I was able to articulate that to me. And then I went on to do a master's degree with very little support. It was during COVID, working in A&E at the time. I had a little baby, 2-year-old boy, and I was just separated because of actually, it was because of domestic violence. And similarly, I went through a court process. I won't go into too much detail, but that was really troubling because whilst at the end of it, it was a positive outcome, I felt like that kind of power dynamic really terrified me. Like, what if I'm going to be misunderstood? What if they're going to misconstrue something that I say? And then there's all this weight added to it, and it doesn't represent the situation. So that was a similar situation. And in defense to my ex-husband, he had some great qualities, and I kind of learned a lot about my relationship patterns. You know, what has my childhood evolved to then create in terms of what I'm seeking, in terms of individuation and all the rest of it. So that was positive. That's a positive I can take out of it. But there was so much that I kind of didn't see. I saw it and I'd reflect it back. Like, I say something, he says something on the phone. I repeat what he said with a question mark, like, "What do you mean by that?" And he'd deny it. And I'd say, "This is word for word what you said." And he'd be like, "I didn't." And I'd be like, "No, but you really did." Now I feel like I'm going a little bit mental. Like, you just did say that. And I think because I was so persistent in calling that out, it stopped, but then the approach would be a bit different and a bit more covert. So there's, again, a massive learning opportunity in there, but quite painful to negotiate that. So when I did this master's degree, I got very little support. And during that process, what I felt like I was being met with these strange responses in terms of, say, if I was asking for clarity or support, all of a sudden my line manager would become very boundaried. He'd have a meeting with me and he would not be there. It was paradoxical. He'd either be there and open the door at the exact minute and be taking notes. And when I reflected back and I said, "I noticed there's been a change here in terms of being very regimented. Can you tell me what that's about? Is it a change in your approach to working, or is it something to do with something that I'm missing? You know, is there something else I need to be doing?" And if you feel like you need to do that, that's okay. But that would then be met with like this projection of like you're calling them out. But really, what I was doing was just noticing something. Do you know what I mean? Or like,
yes, I do.
And then the opposite was they'd arrange a meeting and then just not be there, and then I'd phone up and I'd be like, "Hi, how are you? Have I written it down wrong? Because that's not unusual," you know. And they'd say, "Oh, I've gone for a walk. I've had a really tough morning." I'd be like, "Oh my gosh, like, if you want to share, that's fine. If not, enjoy your walk. I'm sure we can rearrange, that's fine." But I always felt like I was being tested in some way. And then somebody dropped this comment at work, because I was working with psychiatrists about NPD, ASD crossover. So what I got in my head then was like, this is when I was going through the ADHD assessment. And once I was on ADHD medication, the ASD traits became really apparent. But it was like kind of fighting with one another before that. But then I got it in my head that I had to keep checking myself against this NPD criteria, diagnostic criteria. So anything that I was doing, I was like, okay, so I like to work in this environment because the light's really good, and because you know, there's whatever it would be, I'd be kind of like thinking, what's my motivation? Does that fit with this criteria? And because I was then articulating that, it was almost like I was giving them it was like I was creating this. Is this an issue? Do you understand what I'm saying? But it was more of a defensive, like, if I can check against myself that I'm not that thing, then they're not going to call me out for not being autistic, even though I've been to 4 different people to say, "Are you sure?" Because I've got an ACE score of 7. And are you sure it's not this? I went into like very deep shall I say, it was like a special interest for a while to look at the neural pathways between CPTSD, ASD, and ADHD. I literally mapped it all out. I was like, right, okay, I need to understand because there's crossover here. And every single psychiatrist or like psychologist I've been to is like, it's not a chicken and an egg thing. Like, they both exist. Like, you are all of these things. And so I had to work on self-acceptance. But this embodied invalidation, I'll tell you what happened. I ended up moving out of the NHS, working at a university, teaching mental health nursing. Did that for about 18 months. It was fine. And I was doing really well. And then all of a sudden, when I started trying to access the reasonable adjustments, it was like, imagine the sun shining on you, thinking, ah, and then this parasol's put up, and it's like this block. So many phone calls to try and getting an ADHD coaching appointment, and that's really difficult. So I was like, every time I tried to negotiate 3 different calendars, I was like, oh, brain fried. So I ended up basically leaving. I ended up giving up my nursing, coming off the register, moving abroad, and just thinking, well, what do I do now? Because I feel like I've exhausted all opportunities of like trying to make this work. I can't be anybody else. And I know that I've got a load of potential, but it's really frustrating because I feel like I can't live into that. Sorry, that was a lot.
No, I appreciate. I just want to say you have so much to offer, because what you just described is what I consider fundamental working knowledge of how to interact with people in those environments. What you've just described is what a lot of neurotypical people just lack. They don't even consider. And part of the problem is that they don't even consider that the way they're behaving or communicating might be problematic. That's something I've noticed.
A lot is.
What is going on here?
There's a refusal
to accept, and that's what makes Milton's double empathy problem so
critical for people
to understand. It's like, no, this is a communication is a two-way phenomenon at minimum.
I read a great research paper, about Milton's, and it was like, imagine you've got a row of neurotypicals, a row of neurodivergents, and then alternating, and the bottom row was the one that did fared the worst, along the way, kind of. It's like that Simon Says thing where they start with something and then they work out what you've said at the end of it. I didn't say that at the beginning, but that's because it's late on. But it was a fascinating paper, and another thing is, I feel like it makes me quite scared when I don't know what somebody else is formulating about me. So, for example, that whole thing where I went into that defensively, mapping myself against the diagnostic criteria, that's not an ordinary thing to do. But somebody said something, and it stuck in my mind, and it felt really dangerous to be misperceived. And I kept doing it, and that was them fueling the problem. But I didn't get the relief unless I could kind of go, no, I know what my motivation is, and I know that can't be misinterpreted. It was like, I'm going to all this length to try and work out any eventuality about this might be perceived, even though I know my reality right now is I've got this really honest intention. And one time something happened at a psychologist, like this testing. I think it was just because I was a mental health nurse and working in that field, because you've got, like you said, the cross section between work, healthcare and education. I was like straight in the middle of that. And he did this thing where he was a professor in traumatology, and I was asking him about something to do with like the crossover of all those things. And he did this thing where he said he didn't believe in somatic experiencing. Well, that's a really, really it doesn't make any sense, because there's a foundation of such like strong embodied evidence of that. But I understand within the context of NPD research, like if somebody was to do that, the hope would be, if you did have that, then you would be grandiose and you would think, oh, they don't know anything, I know more than them, and then you'd withdraw, and then it's like almost like a stonewalling approach, but not. And then I started thinking, right, I know you're doing that, because so if you're doing that and that doesn't resonate with me, that must be because you're testing, am I that, when I know I'm just ASD and these other things. But if I raise that with you and say, I'm noticing this, I still think you're a great person, I don't understand why this is happening. If you lie, it seems to be okay in this context, but if I lie, I might be bad. If dark psychology is okay for you because you've got this curiosity, is this going on? If I did it, why is it different? It was like such a mental space to be in. And then I was like, right, if I actually raise this, now it's almost like, if you deny it, you're definitely NPD. I was like, I can't win,
I just want to jump in and say,
because I don't want to interrupt you. You can
definitely get on
the hamster wheel, and
what
Helps me is always knowing that narcissists, for example, don't do that. They don't, right? You're safe if you're questioning, like,
oh my god,
am I doing the thing? No, because you just wondered if you're doing the thing.
we're coming up past the hour. I don't want to.
No, it's good. Love your comments. Really important.
Um,
Roger, how many people have their hand up at this point?
I believe there's
Roger?
one more. That's
Okay, maybe we could stop there, and then I have a couple things to say to wrap up. Is that all right?
great.
Thank you. I just want to say, stay with it.
We need more practitioners,
Practitioners who know what's up, working in the field.
hands down.
Yeah, hello. I'm not sure how to articulate what I want to say, but I do firstly want to say thank you for this presentation. It's been very interesting and I don't know, sort of explains a lot of the things I deal with. I didn't know I was autistic until about 3.5 years ago. I was just diagnosed this year, a couple months ago. But basically, I spent the vast majority of my life living as a man. It wasn't until 4 years ago that I became aware that I'm not one. And that on top of being unawarely kind of autistic has been just phenomenal trauma. And like one reason I wanted to talk about this a little was because I have been listening and no one else spoke from quite this perspective. And so when you mentioned other marginalizations making things exponentially worse, it's just been incredibly difficult. I've had a lot of run-ins with the police and I've been abused most of my adult life, well, and my childhood, but I've only recently learned how that works. But yeah, it's just some of the things, the topics you brought up were helpful in seeing that my experiences, well, other than being trans, are really very common amongst autistic people. And I don't know, like I said, I don't know how to articulate all of it. I'm trying not to put 20 different topics into one sentence, to paraphrase you. But I think it's sad because, like, I do believe that neurodivergent people are feared because we are a lot better at many things than neurotypical people, and they can't stand that. And also, I think, like, for trans people, it's people are intimidated by our courage just to be ourselves, and that applies to a lot of autistic people as well, just because we are more genuine and authentic. And yeah, I don't know, I wish there were an easier way to make change because like I'm lucky in that I live in Canada. I feel very much for people in the US. I don't know how people are managing, but it's pretty bad here too. It's nowhere near as bad, but yeah, it's a very terrifying world, and I don't know. I guess I just sort of wanted to share my feelings on this session today and how it relates to the world we live in and how it relates to my world.
I appreciate that very much. Is it
just like plain old white girl?
okay? Well, I also want to thank you for calling out the trans connection explicitly. That is a particularly perilous identity in the U.S. at the moment, and not just
here, but elsewhere.
But I really want to appreciate. I just really want to
sit with that for a minute
and point you to. I don't know if you can access it, but there actually is some scholarship and some serious attention being given to the autistic trans intersection right now.
And I'm not sure where it
will lead, but you're not the first person to mention this by any stretch. And unfortunately, what catalyzes a lot of that is tragic events that are totally unnecessary. people's categorical refusal to just accept that humans are all different in the
First place.
and that's one of the things that I'm doing for my discipline in particular. I mean, I'm from the discipline that claims to be concerned with all things human,
But we have not
at all taken seriously other kinds of identities beyond what I would consider tokenism and fashion.
and that's one of the
Points that I'm making, actually. So how can you claim to be the discipline that studies what it means to be human if you're disregarding human diversity? In the first place. So that's partly why I lean on like old school, fundamental, sort of foundational theorists in my discipline. Like Mary Douglas's work on the purity pollution complex, for example, is really powerful description of what's happening here, and helps explain why people feel so strongly about things that violate what we consider to be neat and discrete categories in the first place. Like we have foundational descriptive work that needs to be done that has not been done.
and in my own discipline.
We haven't even taken seriously at all neurological diversity and what that means for things like enculturation, assimilation, socialization, all of those things. So that's another reason that I'm doing this the way that I'm doing it,
Because they're
things that we have just taken for granted and glossed over as if they're irrelevant. But we're seeing with all of the civil rights and, identity politics discourses that are existing now, the costs of overlooking and ignoring all of those things.
for real people.
So I really appreciate you sharing what you shared.
Thanks, but like unfortunately, I live in the Bible Belt of Canada. I am definitely not a separatist, for the record. But like I've had, well, in Canada we have laws against hate speech and stuff like that for many communities, not just the trans community. But like our police don't even have to follow those laws. They came into my basement suite one time and I told them that they didn't have any right to be there because they didn't have a warrant, and they tased me. And then they locked me in the back of their vehicle on a hot August afternoon with all the windows up and stood outside just talking in slurs and all sorts of stuff just to try and provoke a severe reaction out of me. And, hospitals didn't take me seriously when I went in there during a psychotic break because they wouldn't even listen to me. Like, they refused to understand me, like you were sort of talking about earlier as well. And that almost cost me my life. I don't know. I don't know. I think I've probably said enough. Thank you for hearing me out. I did want to share, especially in case there is anyone else in the participants who might be trans and feeling a bit alone or something. And yeah, thank you so much for this today. I came because my therapist recommended it.
Wow.
Luckily, she's autistic as well, so she kind of gets me. I'm very lucky in that way.
Yeah,
By the way,
that's
we have,
precious.
sorry, Christopher.
No,
I
you're
just
fine.
wanted to mention we have, again, I'll post the link on Facebook to our YouTube channel, but we have specifically trans content library, and we also have just a lot of natural overlap.
There is a great deal of
overlap, neuroqueerness and queerness of all kinds.
So I'll post that, and people can
give a look at that. I am toast. And I'm realizing I'm having more and more difficulty tracking. I don't want it to end. Like, this is why we need our own city, right? Someday, someday. But yeah, so I just wanted to let people know before I crash out, we have many amazing events coming up. We've had a great influx of people, another global wave of people coming in since we went global, a year and a half ago or whatever it was. It's just continued to gain momentum. So happy about that. So do look on our social media for the things coming up. Things like this too, like very much discussion oriented, experience oriented. We are not an academic group. We are a cultural group, and every single one of you is important to us. I'm very proud of the fact that we have over 2,000 members, and we've only had to ask 4 people to leave. I mean, that speaks to our giftedness.
It's incredible.
Socially, right? It just never happens. This is a very special group. To that end, I want to make clear for any newcomers that have wandered in, this is an Autistic Voices First space. If you are non-autistic, you are more than welcome to listen to what we have to say and absorb our experiences. This is not the place to refute us. That's not happening here. This is a safe place for us in a world that has virtually no safe spaces, and I'm going to keep it that way.
So I don't really use Facebook. Is this type of thing listed in the Discord?
Yes, I don't follow the Discord, but Roger, if you'd be willing to put up the links one more time for everyone, and yeah, let's do. There'll be. Sorry.
Yes.
There will be links for you to follow to continue the discussion. And now I am not going to verbal anymore. I love you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Donna.
I just want to say also, I thank every single one of you for your comments. I wish I could see all of the chats, and I wish I could have a conversation with every single person here. I really do. Like, that's really important to me. I know how important it's been for people to give me time. So I just want to thank you for coming and spending your day, night, morning, whatever it is for you, where you are. And I'm still very much in dissertation mode, so I can't give as much time to interacting in online spaces as I would like to right now. I'm just trying to crank out the writing that I have to do to finish this, so that then I can do the next thing that's coming. Because I say that because I've seen a couple of people say, how do I follow your work or whatnot? I am thinking of publication strategies that make the work accessible. But figuring out how to talk back to the Academy to satisfy their expectations and to have it publicly accessible, and the language being accessible also, is a little tricky. I'd feel good about what's happening, but it's too early for me to say how I'm going to do that yet exactly. But I'm always open. And Don and Roger, if it's okay if you share my email if you want to in the communication, I will do my best to get back to you. Like I said, I'm in writing mode, and it's an end of term, and I'm starting a new class that I haven't taught yet in January. So I will do my best, and I genuinely want to know what you have to say. So I thank you very much. It's been hard not to tear up here, actually. So. Anyone have anything else they want to say before we go? I need to use the restroom too in a couple of hours. I'll say that, Dawn. I'm grinding also, but I'm here for it if someone else has something they want to say before we go.
I think you should let yourself take care of your body right now, is my personal feeling, and I appreciate you so much. Christopher, this has really, really helped me. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. I'm delighted to hear that, actually. Thank you all so much. And thank you, Dawn and Roger, for making this happen. I don't envy you in processing this recording, but I really deeply appreciate you doing all of that work. Having done transcriptions and converting audio interview, like video interviews, I really appreciate the processing power, computer and human, that is involved. So thank you very much for doing this. And again, thank you so much, all of you, for coming.
Thank you, Christopher.
Thank you.